Hey everyone, I'm Luke. I'm the editor and producer for the Second and Short podcast. I just wanted to let everyone know this week will be an audio-only episode because we ran into some technical difficulties this week. We appreciate your patience and understanding as we iron out our kinks in these first initial episodes. Thanks again and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Second and Short podcast. Again, we call this podcast the Second and Short podcast because in the NFL, and football in general, on Second and Short, the entire playbook is open. You can run it, you can pass it, you can take a shot. Really, the defense isn't going to know what's coming. And similarly, when we come into here, the content's never going to be the same. We're gonna throw this at you, we're gonna throw that at you, we're gonna talk about a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, so last week we did an AFC preview, covered all 16 teams. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to do it a little differently, though. And then at the end, we're going to have time for our season predictions. Week 1 is finally here. Lions at Chiefs. We can't wait. We have some predictions, some projections of how the season is going to go. So let's get things started with the NFC East and Eli.
Yeah, before we get to the Lions there in the North, let's talk about the East and start with that some people think are the NFC champion favorites and the former NFC champions, the Philadelphia Eagles. So first, just to preface, the NFC East this year, they're matched up against the NFC West and the AFC East. The Eagles added a lot, specifically in the draft with those trio of Bulldogs that a lot of people think that they had one of the best draft classes. To go along with that, they really didn't even need to get all that great. They were just so balanced last year. They were third in yards per game and points per game, and a very balanced attack as they were top 10 in both rushing and in passing. They were also second in yards per game on defense, so their offense complement each other with the passing and the rushing, but their offense and defense complemented each other very well. They did lose C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Javon Hargrave. However, with those trio Bulldogs that they gained, they shouldn't miss too much there. And I started with the Eagles in this division because they're obviously the favorite and they're the team that I think takes home that division. I think their floor at the worst, maybe they're a 500 team, but they still get that wild card spot. And then the ceiling, I'm not saying that it's going to be a disappointing season if they don't win a Super Bowl, but I think that's got to be the ceiling is to win a Super Bowl. And I think they end up winning the division. I don't think they quite get to the Super Bowl. We'll get to those picks later, though. But quickly, just on to the Cowboys now. They did have an above-average offense last year, led by their rushing attack. That kind of surprised me that they were an above-average offense. And they did have very good pass protection. They're fourth best in the league in sacks allowed, only 27 sacks given up. However, they did have a below-average defense. I'll talk about this more with the Commanders later, but they did really well against the pass, but they did struggle at times against the run, which could be a concern. But they did lead the league in pressure percentage, pressuring the quarterback. They were very good at that, but they need to finish their pressures as they were third in the league in sacks, but they were still very far behind the Eagles, I think like 20 sacks behind the Eagles, so really need to finish there. Floor, about a 7-win team. Ceiling, I can see them challenging the Eagles for the division. I don't think they quite get there, though. I think they are about 9 or 10 wins. I think they do get a wild card spot. Maybe they pick up a win for McCarthy, but I don't think they get too far into the playoffs. So I have the Eagles and the Cowboys there in the top of the division, pretty far separated, but at the bottom I see it a little bit closer with the Giants and the Commanders. I'll start with the Giants, but again, I have these two teams right now as a little interchangeable. They did add a decent bit in the draft. They added Deontay Banks at corner, John Michael Schmitz up front, and then also Jalen Hyatt at receiver, who might not start, but we'll probably see some time there. However, their big offseason wins, in my opinion, came in a lot of their contract, might say disputes that ended up getting agreed out with Saquon and DJ. They also didn't turn the ball over very much. I was shocked to see that they only threw 7 interceptions and had the lowest turnover percentage, so turnovers per play. Really surprised me, but they did have a below-average defense. They really struggled in the run defense. They need to get better in pass rush. So it surprised me that they actually blitzed the highest in the league. So they were very aggressive on defense. However, they didn't obviously lead the league in sacks and weren't even up there. So it didn't really even out, and that probably means they're getting burnt in the back end at times, and that we saw that last year. So that could be an issue. And they tied for last in the league in interceptions on defense as well. So they struggled at times forcing turnovers. I think their floor is a 5 or 6 win team, but I don't see that as so. I think their ceiling is challenging the Eagles for the division. I don't think they come close to that. However, I think they end up around 8 wins and fall short of the wild card spot. And then on to the Commanders. Again, I see the Commanders and the Giants very interchangeable here. They added, I think their biggest addition in the offseason is their offensive coordinator and Eric Bieniemy. They did add some other pieces up front with Nick Gates and Andrew Wiley, and then at backup quarterback with Jacoby Brissett. Hopefully we'll be able to help Howell out. Last year they had a slightly above average offense, slightly better rushing offense than passing. They did have a top 5 defense. Their defense, I believe, is going to be strong again this year. However, for how good they were up front, they did struggle against the run at times, again, like the Giants, and they did lose Cole Holcomb as well. And they were one of 5 teams, again, along with the Giants, with single-digit interceptions on defense. And they were second to last in QB hurry percentage, which really surprised me with how strong their front is. I see their floor and ceiling, again, very similar to the Giants. I see these teams as very, very similar this year, which could create some exciting games. I see it as about a 5-win team with the ceiling, again, challenging the Eagles for a division. Again, I don't see that happening. I'm just saying their ceiling if Howell balls out and their defense plays really well. I think they fall a game or 2 behind the Giants, though they still are short of that wild card spot. I don't see Howell making the step needed to get to the playoffs or win a playoff game or 2. I think that he doesn't need to be exceptional for them to be around a 500 team with the pieces around him, but I don't see him being good enough to go out and win games by himself and get to the playoffs. So that's kind of my roundup on the NFC East. But if you guys have any ideas or any disagreements, let me know.
I mean, Washington is interesting this year because, is Josh Harris going to make the move, fire Ron Rivera, and then bring in Eric Bieniemy? Because Eric Bieniemy's the hot commodity. Even if he hasn't gotten a head coaching job, who's more valuable right now, Ron Rivera or Eric Bieniemy? And if you look at Ron Rivera, it's a classic story of great guy, 2 Coach of the Year awards, but his record's pretty close to 500. He hasn't been that impressive. A lot of those division championships in Carolina came below 500 with Cam Newton. It's just going to be interesting. What does Ron Rivera have to do this year to get to keep his job? Or because he's getting to the age at this point, does he just go be a defensive coordinator, or does he just try and get into TV? I think it's very likely that Ron Rivera is not on this team one way or another. They might try and cover it up as a retirement, like a mutual of parting ways. I'm curious to see what happens with Ron Rivera and that Washington coaching staff.
Yeah, I would think he would need to get to the playoffs for him to keep his job. And even then, I could see them saying, oh, well, we mutually agreed to go our separate ways. I think you bringing up the Bieniemy point, I think that's a good point. A lot of people thought, why did Bieniemy leave the Chiefs for the Commanders? And it could be maybe in their discussions they said, hey, you're the future head coach of our team, and that could be a very real possibility there.
Yeah. I mean, I really like the Commanders this year, but there are a lot of question marks around them. You brought up the Ron Rivera thing. It's like Ron Rivera's entire career has been based around inconsistency. Like the Carolina Panthers haven't had a back-to-back winning season, and I forget the exact number, but let's say 20 years. Like they'll go 15-1 and have the MVP Cam Newton, and then the next year they won't even go 500. Like his entire career has been very inconsistent. Great guy, seems like a really good coach and a guy that players want to play for, but at the same time, it's like you can't ignore those inconsistencies.
Before we move on to the next division, do you guys see any challenge to the Eagles in this division?
I mean, Dallas is one of the best teams in the NFC, and then New York should progress. Like Daniel Jones is going into year 2 with Brian Dable and Mike Kafka. He should be better. So technically the Giants have an argument, and then Dallas talent-wise does as well. Philly's roster is just second to none right now. They're not the best team in the NFL, I don't think, but their roster is. Howie Roseman has them involved in every single trade discussion, every single free agent. If somebody's out there, they're marketable to Philadelphia. So the roster, I think, just kind of puts them far and away right now from everyone in the NFCs. But also, I mean, it's an injury-driven league. Heaven forbid Hurts goes down for even a handful of weeks like he did last year, and Minshew had to come back in. Marcus Mariota. But, all right, we got the NFC North next.
Yeah, I'll go next. All right, so I have the NFC North. We'll start with the Bears. Big question marks around the Bears this year. Obviously, they had the worst record in the NFL last year, but they also have a quarterback that everybody expects to take a jump this year. So we'll start there. The first question is Justin Fields. Can he take a leap from what he did last year? He was able to produce, I think, in my personal perspective, more from a fantasy perspective than maybe like what translates to wins. Did they lose some close games? Yes. Can they take that gap and close it and end up winning those games at the end of it? Rushing will only get you, as a quarterback, will only get you so far. You have to be able to, at the end of the day, pass the ball at an elite level or a really good level. And we'll see this year, I think, whether or not he can take that next leap. Teams are going to game plan for him to run the ball, and they're going to stop him. And so he's going to have to stand in the pocket. He's going to have to stand in there with the pass rushers, take some hits, throw the ball down the field. And I think that he has a really good duo in order to do that between Moore and Mooney. I'm really high on Moore this year. I think that he is going to have a really good year. Claypool as a third is not a terrible option. As a Steelers fan, we all have our opinions of Chase Claypool, but I don't think that that's a terrible third by any means. Big thing for them, O-line, in my opinion, is among the worst in the entire NFL. Justin Fields was sacked 55 times last year, which is tied for a league lead with Russell Wilson. They have to shore that up. He can't, as a rushing quarterback, as a guy who relies upon his athleticism, he can't be getting hit 55 times a year. He just can't. He can't hold the ball that long. He needs his offensive line to protect him. He has to stay healthy. Yeah, they have two good tight ends this year. Obviously, Kmet coming back, I expect him to have a pretty good year with them, and they signed Robert Tonyan. They also have Mercedes Lewis, who's a good blocker. Defense is underwhelming. They have some pieces in there. I really do like their secondary. I think between Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon on the outside, and then Jaquan Brisker and Eddie Jackson in there, I think that they do have a really good secondary. But, you have to get home at the end of the day. They also added Unique Ngakoue, which I think was a really good add for them. Could translate to some sacks. He's had some good years. He's had some rough years, but I anticipate him having a pretty good year for the Bears this year. For them, their floor, I see them as like 6 or 11 or 7 and 10. And then ceiling, probably like 11 and 6, maybe 12 and 5. Squeak out a wild card win, so maybe a first round win and then an exit after that. Moving on next to the Vikings. I really like the Vikings receiving core. We have some people here who are not huge fans of Jordan Addison, but I am a fan of Jordan Addison. I think obviously Justin Jefferson right now is the best wide receiver in the NFL. And then you've got Jordan Addison behind him, and KJ Hamler's not a slub either. So I think that between those three, and then obviously you add Hawkinson into the mix too, I think that they're going to pass the ball a lot this year, especially with the loss of Dalvin Cook. This will be a pretty consistent thing I talk about in this division. The O-line's bad. It's sorry. We'll cut that part. Move forward. Edit. The only quarterbacks sacked more than Kirk Cousins last year were, like I said in the last one, Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. Kirk Cousins was sacked 46 times, same as Geno Smith. So the O-line is just, it's bad. They added David Quessenberry in free agency, and they didn't do anything about it in the draft. And so, Quessenberry right now is listed as a backup, I believe, and so we'll see what happens with that. But, their defense is kind of average, so they're going to be relying a lot on their offense this year. They did sign Byron Murphy, which is a good sign. I think they also signed Marcus Davenport, who is D-line. He's a good player. They lost Eric Kendricks, who is probably one of the better middle linebackers in the NFL. And then they also signed N'Keal Harry, which is a really big sign. He's on their practice squad right now. So they lost Patrick Peterson, which is a big loss in their defense, even though he might not be what he used to be in an all-pro. He had 5 picks last year, which 6 was league leading. And so he had statistically a pretty good year last year. There's a lot of questions around the Vikings and how far they'll make in the playoffs, but I don't think that most people are questioning whether or not they'll make the playoffs this year. As far as their floor and their ceiling, I think their floor is probably above 500. You're looking at probably 9 and 8 as their floor. There's a lot of question marks in this division as far as who is going to come out on top of it. And as far as their ceiling, divisional round of the playoffs. They lost in the first round last year, so it's not 100% certain as to what will happen with them. Moving on next to the Lions. The Lions, I'm really high on the Lions this year. I think that they have a good offense. And I think that everything starts with Dan Campbell. And I'll talk about that a little bit and like the culture that he's brought there. But like, I think that Dan Campbell is a perfect head coach for Detroit. I think that there's a lot of there's some teams in the past that have had a coach that just fits perfectly. Bill Belichick that fits in New England, Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh, Sean Payton in New Orleans. And even though, Dan Campbell's still kind of new there, I think Dan Campbell's the perfect coach for Detroit. He's that hard nose. He's rough. He's a break their kneecaps kind of guy. And I think that's exactly what Detroit needed. Their offense is good. They have the best offensive line in the division. Young guys, pretty good. Across the board. Can they take that next step and be like really good? Penei Sewell, obviously very good. As far as the questions around the Lions, the secondary is questionable. Obviously, they added 2 pieces in this offseason with Cam Sutton and C.J. Gardner-Johnson. As Steelers fans, we know that Cam Sutton was the best player or the best corner that the Steelers had last year. And he is an actual football player. I think that he's very good. He'll make an impact for them. And obviously, we talked earlier about C.J. Gardner-Johnson and how he can affect games. I think that the big question for me, and I think the big question for a lot of people who watch the NFL is like, can a team that's been this bad for this long really take the leap and actually be good? The Lions are historically a really bad franchise. And I think that a lot of people are hopeful for them this year, but we'll kind of see how far they can actually go this year. It's like they're one of 2 teams to ever go 0-16. So like there's a lot of questions around like, okay, even though we like what they look like on paper, it's like, can they actually do what they need to do to take it to that next level? And then the last team I have is the Packers. Mixed reviews on the Packers. I personally am not super high on the Packers this year. I don't think they're going to fall off a cliff because they still have a good roster when you look at it from top to bottom. They have obviously the big question mark is quarterback. Is Jordan Love going to be able to do, not what Aaron Rodgers did, but is he going to be able to fill into that role? Obviously, the receivers, again, losing Devonta Adams is big, but you're looking at young guys like Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. Can they do enough? Can they do enough? You obviously lost a tight end, and you got 2 tight ends, really, and you got a young guy in Lucas Musgrave. The O-line, again, is questionable. Obviously, they have the left tackle who's aging right now, in Bakhtiari, but, what are they going to be as a line? They obviously have Elton Jenkins as well, who has in the past been pretty decent. But, the weapons are okay. I think the heavy focus is going to go to the defense. The defense is good. They still have players across the board. They have Jair Alexander, and they have Eric Stokes in the secondary with Darnell Savage. I think that the pass rushers, Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, players like that, they have a good defense, especially I think in this division. LaFleur, I think that we'll get a big look at LaFleur this year and his actual coaching ability because he's not going to have the safety net of Rodgers, and people aren't going to be like, oh, well, he has Rodgers. Like, I think we're going to get a good look at LaFleur as a coach this year, and I do think that he lives up to being a good NFL coach. As far as my favorites in this division, it's tough to say for me. It's probably between the Lions and the Vikings. I could see them kind of going neck and neck throughout, and I think the Vikings probably end up winning this division and being the representation for the North. Anything that you guys want to add to that?
I just think Detroit's going to win it, but
Yeah, I could see that too, honestly. Yeah.
Detroit's interesting because they're kind of like the Bills in respects to the Bills are always the Super Bowl favorites despite reaching the AFC Championship once in the past 20 years. Meanwhile, Detroit hasn't made the playoffs in close to a decade. And when they have made the playoffs with Stafford, it hasn't been very successful. Yet we're penciling them in pretty much already as the NFC North favorite with a chance to be a sleeper team in the NFC right up there with the Cowboys, right behind the Eagles and the 49ers. Meanwhile, they didn't even make the playoffs last year. And that's not taking anything away from what they did last year. Jared Goff played incredible. The defense can't get any worse. So you'd expect with the weapons that they added, the offense is going to raise and the team will raise. It's just we're putting a lot of pressure on a young team who hasn't had any success before.
Yeah. Well, I agree.
And then the Packers, I am high on the Packers, but It's not because of Jordan Love. I do believe Jordan Love's going to be a good quarterback, but I think it's going to kind of mirror what happened with Rodgers following the Favre era, where the defense is really good. He's going to slowly come into his own, develop with weapons around him, maybe get some better weapons in the future because Christian Watson has potential. Romeo Dobbs, I'm not super high on. Jalen Reed, not super high on. So I think that they're going to be able to hang around because of LaFleur.
Yeah, no, I think that Jordan Love, when I watch him, he reminds me more of Favre than he does of Aaron Rodgers. Like you look at Aaron Rodgers and like the off kilter throws and like not the more mobility than the other two, but like you look at like his pinpoint accuracy and stuff. It's like you look at Brett Favre, it's like, was he accurate? Yeah, but he's also a gunslinger. Like he's not afraid to throw the ball as far as he possibly can down the field. And that's what I see Jordan Love as more than an actual Aaron Rodgers, which I think the Packer fans are going to like because, I mean, a lot of Packers fans still swear that Brett Favre is better than Aaron Rodgers. And I think that's an argument that could be had, but it's like, I think that Packers fans are going to like Jordan Love a lot.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know the hype is there with the Lions. I'm just really worried about their defense. I think you go from a defense that gave up one of the most yards per play last year. I don't think you flip that quickly. However, I do think that there's a chance for, I think that they need to rely on getting turnovers on defense and being more of a bend, don't break. Which a little spoiler alert to later on and for our picks. I think they do force some more turnovers, but I'll get to that later. I just think that as a defense, I don't know if their defense can flip the script just like that to end up winning the division.
Christian, you want to take it away with the West?
Yeah, so the West, there's only two teams that are going to make the playoffs. It's obviously the 49ers, who I think are the favorite in the NFC, and then the Seahawks. But I'll start with the 49ers. They have Kyle Shanahan, who's one of the best offensive minds coach in the league. The only thing that I like Brock Purdy, but their quarterback situation was toxic. It was not good. I don't think Shanahan's good with his quarterbacks with that. They have CMC. Like, their offense weapons are nuts, but also Kittle is dealing with an injury now. Their O-line is all right. I mean, they have the best tackle in the league, but he's up there in age, and they have two good young guys who could be something, but they might not. And they need to sign Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa is their biggest thing on their defense, and other than their linebackers, and they're missing it. But I think their ceiling is make it to the Super Bowl, and their lowest is 500. And then Seattle, they have a great young team, I think. I have faith in Geno Smith. I don't think it was a fluke year. I think he's going to do something like he did last year, maybe a little less than what he did, but I think he'll be good. They have Kenneth Walker, and then their defense got better. They have Jamal Adams returning, and then they also added Witherspoon. You're right. But their O-line was questionable. Their O-line, I don't know if they really fixed their O-line that much, but also they had two young tackles who were rookies last year, who I think are going to be really good this year. And the ceiling for them is a wild card, and their floor, honestly, to me, with them is 500, and they maybe miss the playoffs if they do. And then the other two teams, the Cardinals, they're going 0-17 unless they get like 2 wins. There's nothing special. They're tanking, and I don't like their head coach. There's just nothing there. And then the Rams, I like McVay. I think he'll do something. I think their ceiling 7-10, but they won't make the playoffs, and their floor is 3 wins maybe. But there's nothing really special. I mean, they have Kupp still, and they have Donald, but Donald didn't do that great last year. He also had injuries. And then Kupp had injuries, and he's still struggling with an injury. And they lost Ramsey. So they only have 2 big guys there. So I don't see that their vision being that good other than the first 2 teams I talked about.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
I mean, the Rams are interesting. I would have been a lot higher on them before the Cooper Kupp injury. Now I feel a lot more shaky. But if Stafford can stay healthy, and that's a big if, not only with the way he plays, because he's super tough, and he just won't talk about an injury. And then all of a sudden, it'll be something crippling happening with his back. And they'll be like, why didn't you tell us about this in July? And he'll be like, oh, I just wanted to tough it out. But if you look at their offensive line, there's nobody there. It is a weak offensive line. We don't know if they're going to be able to run the ball because it's been hot and cold ever since Gurley left. Sometimes Cam Akers is really good. Sometimes he's on the trade block. Cooper Kupp, I think, is the key because he's another coach on the field. He's Matthew Stafford's best friend. If he can get back sooner rather than later, I actually feel like LA can return to the playoffs because Aaron Donald, Sean McVay, Stafford, all their legacies are still tied up in it. They're not coming back for just the money at this point. They're a little sour about the way last year ended. If Cup can get back on the field, I think LA can squeak into a wild card spot.
Yeah, so I'm also kind of higher on the Rams this year. I think that Matt Stafford is, he had a bad year. It happens sometimes. I don't think that he's falling off a cliff as far as his career. I did see a report. I think it was like his wife on a podcast or something like that said that like
His wife's an idiot. She runs her mouth all the time.
But basically she said, no comment on that. But like basically she said that like he can't connect with the young players on the team. And that like they're constantly they have their face in their phones. Like they call him sir. It's like,
and since she has said that she regretted saying that, but also that's the world we live in now. It's kind of interesting with Travis Kelce said something today about Chris Jones on his podcast. Like you have to be careful because there's censorship that needs to occur now that didn't have to happen before. You can't have spouses trying to create a market for themselves kind of out the locker room because that's against the bro code also. And then all of a sudden there can be gripes in the locker room. Travis Kelce with Chris Jones. You don't want Chris Jones to come back week 8 or whenever he comes back and have a problem with the second best player on the team. So it's just kind of an interesting world we live in, and it's still kind of players and coaches are feeling their way around now that everybody has their own form of media. A lot of players are trying to do podcasts and stuff. Some Hall of Fame quarterbacks' wives are trying to do podcasts. So
yeah, I think I did have one thought on the Geno Smith thing because I know it's kind of a mixed review. I was one of the people who was really low on the Seahawks last year, thinking they were going to be really bad. And obviously, Geno Smith took them to a playoff berth. Like, I mean, they had a really good season. As far as like what they're going to do this year, I'm not 100% sure because in the past, we've seen Geno Smith at a low and we've seen Geno Smith at a high. He talked in one of his post game pressers or something like that when he was on the field talking, and he said they asked him how he felt about being written off. He's like, "Well, I didn't write back. Like that's an all time clip. Like that's great." And I think that's what Geno Smith kind of brings is that chip right now. So I mean, personally, I hope that he can kind of repeat the season they had last year. But we'll kind of have to wait and see what happens with the Seahawks.
anything to add, Corks?
I'm good.
All right, I'm going to finish it then with the NFC South, and I hate the NFC South. It is the most boring division in the entire NFL. Like, the Saints are probably the favorites right now if you kind of took a consensus around the country, but even them, I feel like they're just hanging on by a thread to the Sean Payton era. They're like the Walmart brand of Sean Payton and Drew Brees. Every player on their team is old. They're trying to just kind of latch on when really I feel like they need a collapse. They need to move on, get a new coach. Dennis Allen, he's a solid coach, but is he going to bring you another Super Bowl? I don't think so. Derek Carr, he's solid. Is he going to bring you another Super Bowl? Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams, there's some talent there, but even at this point, I'm not really sure what they are at this point in their career. Michael Thomas, if he can come back, him and Chris Olave, that's a great duo right there. But then switch over to the defense, and I'm just as negative. Cameron Jordan, at this point, he's solid, but is he really a premier edge rusher at this point? And then other old guys, Demario Davis, still playing pretty good football, but if he's your vocal leader and your most talented player on defense, is that really a good thing at this point? So the Saints, I'm just not super high on. They might win it, but I feel like that's not even really saying much about their team. Tampa Bay, they're interesting to me because I feel like there should be so much optimism there. There's still some premier talent, whether it's Devin White, Godwin, Mike Evans, Levante David, Tristan Wirfs. But despite that, there's so much pessimism. Like Baker Mayfield, I still think has some of the it factor. So you'd think that would be a good place for them. Todd Bowles, I think, is a good coach. But there's just no optimism even with the team. So I don't know how I, as a fan am supposed to feel optimistic about that. Sean Tucker, shout out to Syracuse. I feel like he's one of the bright spots on the team. Moving on to Carolina, they're probably my pick. Bryce Young, I feel like, has a great coaching staff around him, whether it's Josh McCown, Jim Caldwell. Having all those guys together, I think, are really going to help. And then in addition to that, while their roster is definitely not the best, especially if Brian Burns' holdout continues, it's going to be interesting to see because I think that coaching staff can kind of just keep them afloat long enough to stay alive. And then all of a sudden, they're the favorites with 3 weeks left to go in the season. Atlanta's another interesting one. I love to watch them just because it's positionless football, whether it's with Bijan, Algier, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Cordero Patterson, all those guys. They're not really wide receivers, tight ends, or running backs. They can play a little bit of everything. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Part of me kind of wants to see Taylor Heineke just come in instead of Desmond Ridder. I mean, he's just so fun to watch. And Desmond Ridder, we were talking about it with Ron Rivera earlier. I think he's solid and a great guy, and because of that, he kind of just gets a pass. I think even if you look at the quarterbacks from the previous year's draft class, I'm taking Sam Howell. I'm taking newly Patriots quarterback Matt Corral over him. Like, all those guys have better talent. Of course, Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis. So Desmond Ridder, it's going to be interesting to see how far he holds on to that. I could see any of these 4 teams finishing first or last. I think it is just a division of mid. Nothing really excites me. The Panthers are my pick just because they're the team that has the highest upward trajectory moving forward past this season.
I don't disagree that they have the highest upward trajectory after the season. I don't know about this season, though. I disagree that they're... I know you said any team can finish first or last, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but the Panthers might be the one exception where I do disagree with it, to be honest. I just can't see that much of a turnaround happening while they also have a rookie quarterback. It'd be one thing if they were okay the past couple of seasons and then they bring in a rookie quarterback and maybe he can deal with it a little bit and win 1 or 2 games and then just distribute, kind of what I talked about with Howell earlier. However, I don't see a turnaround happening and a rookie quarterback playing great at the same time. But at the same time, the division is so bad. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, he's doing a hold-in right now. So
I don't think he's proved himself to hold out to get paid.
14 and a half sacks last year, I believe. Everyone's trying to get their dollar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the Bucs are an interesting team this year. Like, kind of like you touched on, it's like, one of the things that you talked about was like, they have good pieces on offense and defense. It's like, you don't really have to be that good to throw the ball to Mike Evans. Let's be completely honest. Like, obviously he's had good quarterbacks in the past. You don't have to be that good to throw the ball to Mike Evans. Throw it up. He's 6'4", 6'5", something like that. He's a massive guy. You got Chris Godwin, who's always open, and the entire team says that has better hands than Mike Evans. Like, you don't have to be this top-tier quarterback like Tom Brady in order to have success with the Bucs. Obviously, they had the luxury of having Tom Brady, and that's why they won a Super Bowl. So I'm not saying that like the Bucs are going to make the playoffs, but I think that they're not going to be a bottom 5 team like some people think they might be.
There should be more
Mike
optimism, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree. So I mean, the defense is mostly back. That they had from really even the Super Bowl time.
And to be fair, they're older, but at the same time, they're not a complete drop-off. I'm not saying that they're the Super Bowl defense from 3 years ago, but at the same time, I feel like they should be competitive in the NFC South. But even them, they're not really giving themselves a chance. It's kind of just written on the walls. Todd Bowles will be fired at some point mid-season, and they're going to just scrap everything.
Brady hangover. Yeah. And I actually do want to touch on the Saints real quick because I am actually the opposite. I am high on the Saints this year. I do think that they're going to have a good season. I think that they have the best QB they've had in 2 years, or really 2 years since before Breeze retired. Like, Breeze kind of fell off a little bit at the end there. I think that Derek Carr is a step up from anything they've had in the past couple of years. I do think that they obviously touched on the 2 running backs. Like, after week 3, they're going to have 2 really good running backs, good O-line. Defense, obviously question marks because of age. But I personally see them good enough to be like a top 3 in the NFC, top 3.
I don't know if Derek Carr is better than Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston.
Which one of those guys was an MVP candidate at some point in his career?
How long ago was that?
That was a while ago.
Yeah, that's worse than bringing up the Carson Wentz 2017 MVP conversation.
Listen, Frank Reich can make him. I know he has nothing to do with the
Saints.
Saints.
By that argument, let's bring Carson Wentz into New Orleans. He's still out there.
Let's do it.
Scrap Derek Carr. All that, the $40 million a year. Don't need it.
And they have 30 and 30 as the backup. Jameis Winston, 30 and 30.
All right, so that concludes our NFC wrap-up. Now we have some predictions for you guys. We're going to go through, give our MVP pick, our offensive player pick, etc. We're going to start off with MVP. Josie, you want to start us off?
Sure, let's do it. MVP of this season. My vote goes to Jalen Hurts. I think that when you look at the Eagles roster, we talked about this earlier. It's like it's really good. You know, it's as far as like talent wise, it's probably one of the best, if not the best, in the NFL. Obviously, they have a lot of young guys. There's some question marks at like middle linebacker, off ball linebacker, with like Nakobe Dean. Can he take that step? Can he do what he needs to do? But I think that when you look at their offense specifically, they didn't get any worse by any means. And some people would argue that they probably got better based on experience. It's like, I see Jalen Hurts really being that top tier caliber guy again this year. And I think that based on his performance and it being similar to last year and maybe some fall off from other players from last year, I see Jalen Hurts as the MVP this year.
I'm the same with you. I got Jalen Hurts. The only other two guys I see is Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes. But Patrick Mahomes, he doesn't have all his returning receivers. Kelsey just got hurt. Burrow just is coming back from a calf injury. But Hurts, I feel like he was second in voting last year. I'm pretty sure he was either 2 or 3, and he has the returning guys, and he has all his receivers still and his tight end. And with the new running backs, I don't think it really changes anything. And he could actually, all those other 2 quarterbacks could run too, but he's a way better runner and can run and hit people with it.
Best dual threat in the NFL right now.
Yeah, so you guys are taking the, like Christian said, the person that finished second in MVP voting. I'll take the guy that was in third, and that was Josh Allen. I think this is the year that the Bills put it together. I think they have a remarkable year. I think he's got the weapons around him. I like their young tight end. I think that they have a remarkable year. I think this is the year that he outplays Mahomes and the Bills outplay the Chiefs as a whole. And I wouldn't be surprised if Josh Allen going forward the next few years starts to surpass Mahomes more consistently. I'm not just saying in career accolades because that's going to take a lot. But I really do think that this is the year that he starts outplaying Mahomes. And I think he takes home the MVP and the Bills having an amazing season.
Yeah, not that any of our picks were really that surprising. I mean, a quarterback wins it every year, typically a quarterback from one of the top conferences. I am going to go Mahomes just because I feel like as a podcast, we can't have no one select Mahomes. I feel like that's just asking for the Chiefs to go 17-0 and repeat. I will, however, be heavily rooting for a non-quarterback, whether it's a running back, receiver, or defensive player to win MVP. Adrian Peterson was the last one in 2012. I would love for a running back to win MVP. Saquon, I feel like, might be a good sleeper there because if I was New York, I would just run him into the ground after I'd given him that 1 year little buffer. But you want to go to Offensive Rookie of the Year now?
Let's do it. Offensive Rookie of the Year. My pick for Offensive Rookie of the Year this year is Zay Flowers. Obviously, wide receiver coming out of Boston College in the Ravens system. The Ravens, part of the reason that they are revamping their system is because they ran the ball so much and they didn't really throw it. Like, I think that we're going to see a lot of throwing from Lamar this year. I think that Odell Beckham is a good addition for them. The question is he going to stay healthy? How many games he can play? Is he going to be on a snap count? We'll have to wait and see about that. I think the Zay Flowers by midseason, at some point there, he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver. I think that he's got a lot of talent. I know Hayden's big on Zay. He was saying that he's the best wide receiver in this draft class. And I think that he has all the talent that he needs to be the top tier guy there.
Next, AB?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go more process of elimination instead of just going out with my pick first. So first, if you take all of the rookies, I don't see any of the quarterbacks winning it, to be honest. I think that they're on too bad of teams that they're going to have to do a lot for their teams to get near 500, and I think that's what they need to do.
I mean,
something.
Clayton Tune earlier today, Jonathan Gannon said he's ready to go. I think it's going to be Josh Dobbs, but Clayton Tune, I mean,
yeah, I think it'll be Dobbs. So that takes out the quarterbacks for me. Then if you go to the receivers, I love the receivers this year. However, I don't think they can put up the big numbers to get the Rookie of the Year, basically because
they're all on stacked teams with them.
Yeah, they're all number 2s. They're all number 3. So right, you look at JSN at Jackson Smith and Jigba with the Seahawks. He's got great receivers around him. You look at Jordan Addison in Minnesota, probably playing with the best receiver in the league. You got Johnston with the Chargers. He's playing with other great receivers. You got Zay Flowers, great guy, or great player, but again, also playing with other great receivers. We'll see how OBJ does this year, but even with Bateman and
all
Andrews
those
at
teams
tight
have
end.
good tight ends too.
Right,
yeah.
and most of those teams can run the ball. So that takes out the receivers. So now you're down to the running backs. I really like Jahmyr Gibbs, but again, as I said earlier, I'm not as high on the Lions as some others are. So I think that they're going to have to stay very balanced, and they're going to have to throw the ball if they're going to win in those shootouts. So I don't think he gets the stats to do it. So that leaves me with Bijan Robinson. I think he takes home Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think the Falcons won't be good enough to worry about the things that the Lions need to worry about with keeping up with teams in passing. So I think they have the ability to feed Bijan. I think they're good enough where Bijan gets the yards, the stats, but then also maybe the Falcons win, 5 or 6 games on Bijan's back.
I'm with you. I chose Bijan, but I was also between Gibbs. But they're both sort of similar, but Gibbs is faster, more of a elusive back. Bijan could do it all, and he's slower. But I agree with you. They Falcons have the chance to just run it like crazy. The only thing that I also was between Gibbs is that the Falcons have a nuts backfield too. They had a rookie who had 1,000 yards, and they have Cordero still. And then the Lions, they have nuts receivers and everything if they used Gibbs in the pass game, but it's iffy. But I go Bijan.
My pick is Gibbs. I feel like talent-wise, he's there. J-Mo missing the first 6 weeks due to the suspension. He's going to be arguably their best receiver and their best runner. Opportunity is going to be there. Also, as I kind of previously mentioned, the Lions are just everybody's Cinderella team, whether that's warranted or not. Everyone loves the Lions just because we've seen them in the trenches of the league for so long. I feel like he's going to get some sympathy votes. I feel like there's a chance that he outperforms statistically and with impact Bijan. I do want to throw out another name just because no one's brought it up.
Wait, hold up. You think he's gonna be better than Amara at receiving? You say he's gonna be their best receiver, possibly.
I think it's possible. Oof. I don't think he will necessarily, but I wouldn't be surprised if his numbers compete with him. Dalton Kincaid. I don't think a tight end's ever won Rookie of the Year because Kyle Pitts, his rookie year, had 1,000 yards. So if a quarterback performs well, then this is a non-starter. Or if a wide receiver goes off, once again, non-starter. But if everyone kind of just hangs around the middle, Kincaid, if he has like 1,000-yard season, Bills finish with the number 1 seed. Is that enough? Because they're going to flex him out at either the slot or out wide. They're going to do a lot of 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers with Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox as the rest of the personnel. It's going to be interesting to see. It's just a name I thought I would throw out there because it's not necessarily unheard of, and I'm sure the Vegas odds are crazy low right now. But
yeah, so we'll move on to Defense Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
All right, I'll start it off. So I've talked a lot smack on the Lions so far this podcast. However, with my smack talk, it's been a lot about I think they're going to play in a lot of shootouts. I think they're going to throw the ball a lot to keep up with other teams, and I think other teams are going to have to throw the ball a lot against them. So that means higher passing attempts against them, which means more chances for interceptions. I've got Christian Gonzalez as Defensive Rookie of the Year. I think he's not the favorite, but he's up there. Obviously, he was a top
for the
pick.
Patriots. Gonzalez is on the Patriots.
All right,
We'll edit that out.
Cut.
I was wondering where you're going.
Am I thinking of anybody?
Jack Campbell's on Detroit because that's why I was surprised because that's my pick.
I messed that up bad.
It's all good.
Somebody else can go while I look. All right, ready?
I'll go. My pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year this year is a guy who is on the West Coast. He is going to be across from a guy who a lot of people would argue could have been Defensive Rookie of the Year last year, who is a 6'4" speedster. Obviously I'm talking about the Seattle Seahawks, and I'm talking about Devin Witherspoon. I think that, last year Tariq Woolen just had a really great year. He was a guy that I was high on coming out of the draft. Really would have loved for my team to take him, but obviously he fell to Seattle, which was great for them. He kind of fits their prototypical corner thing that they wanted. Obviously, I'm talking a lot about Tariq Woolen right now when I'm supposed to be talking about Devin Witherspoon. But I think that Devin Witherspoon has all of the talent that he needs to be, really just a shutdown corner. Obviously, everybody's seen the tape in college and like what he's capable of doing. But I think that him being across from another guy who's going to be potentially, like a Pro Bowl, All-Pro type guy, I think really fits well for him. I think that maybe we're not back to the Legion of Boom era, but I do think that they're starting to put something together in Seattle on the defense.
No, talent-wise, for sure. I mean, and then you look at the safeties. Jamal Adams going to miss week 1, but him and Quandre Diggs are still there. Secondary is secretly, like, they're kind of sneaking up on people, especially the rest of the defense I'm very unsure about still. But the secondary looks very good. Linebackers are all right, but even last year with Jordan Brooks coming back from injury.
My defense rookie of the year is Will Anderson. I was between Jalen Carter a little bit, but also I think the last time a D tackle won it was Aaron Donald, and there wasn't really much on that defense, and the Eagles' defense is stacked, so I don't see him getting it. I just think Will Anderson's the only really good thing on the Texans' defense, and he's balled out in the preseason. So I think Anderson at least has 10 sacks this year, and I think he's going to win it.
What's the rookie record for sacks in a season? Do we know?
Eli, you want to check?
I'll get to it if you guys want to continue.
Yeah. So my defensive rookie pick, I'm going to stick in Detroit. I'm going to go Jack Campbell. He was actually my second linebacker throughout the draft process. I preferred Drew Sanders a little bit. But Jack Campbell, I mean, he's big, he's fast. Once again, Detroit, he kind of fits the mold. Wouldn't be surprised if he finishes well over 100 tackles. If he can create splash plays, maybe get a couple picks, a couple sacks, wouldn't be surprised if he ends up with the award.
Yeah, so Javon Kearse holds the rookie sack record with 14.5 in 1999. More recently, Parsons had 13 in 2021. But as for my pick, not sure if you guys saw that earlier, messed up Christian Gonzalez. I'm going to stick with Christian Gonzalez. I really liked him in college. The Patriots were third in the league in interceptions last year. However, if you look at their depth chart, their DBs aren't amazing. So I think teams still try to test them. They're a little better up front than they are in the back end. So again, I think teams try to test them. I think Christian Gonzalez is going to have a good amount of shots at interceptions. My only concern there is that with them being a little weaker in the back end, maybe if he does have a really good start to the season, maybe they try to stay away from him. However, we saw with Sauce Gardner had a great start of the season last year, and it didn't really seem like teams tried to stay away from them later on, maybe a little bit, but not as much as you'd assume. So I'm going to go with not necessarily a long shot, but a little bit more of a long shot in Christian Gonzalez. DBs are hard to predict, but in my opinion, same with any defensive player that's a rookie.
Yeah, I loved Gonzalez coming out of the draft. He was my cornerback 1. It is interesting that we have 2 cornerbacks here. It's going to be, and then we didn't even mention a third, a homer pick, but if JPJ ends up cracking the starting lineup for Pittsburgh,
Would not be mad with that.
All right, moving on to Offensive Player of the Year, Josie.
Yeah, so my offensive player of the year this year is a guy who's going to spend his first full season in the system, and it's this system that really, really favors running backs. Obviously, I'm talking about Christian McCaffrey. I'm talking about Kyle Shanahan's system. I think that Christian McCaffrey this year is going to be a do-it-all guy for them. Obviously, they have a ton of weapons in San Francisco, but I do think that everything kind of revolves around CMC this year. Obviously, there's been some health concerns in the past. I think that this year he just has a monster year. Touchdowns, touches, receiving yards, like he can play slot as well as anybody. Obviously, he's a great pure runner of the football as well. Obviously, like I said, they have a lot of options and they can go a lot of different ways, but I do see them going through CMC. I see him having an absolute monster year.
Even with them saying they're going to limit him?
I mean, listen, people throw like not shade, but like they throw shadows all the time.
I think they do
NFL,
limit him
like,
because they have a great backup, Mitchell, and him. I think.
Yeah, I like Mitchell.
I think they
Yeah,
have a
but
great
he's no
backfield.
McCaffrey.
McCaffrey.
But I think
At the end of the day, if they need to score, who's getting the ball?
Yeah,
Christian
like
McCaffrey.
McCaffrey is easily the best running back Kyle Shanahan's had in his like coaching tenure. You talk about like Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman, or like, he had Elijah Mitchell, he had Raheem Mostert, he had like
Isaiah Crowell.
see, and that's the thing. It's like you look at these guys, like CMC is easily the best running back he's had, and I think that he is just going to be super creative, and he's just going to have a field day this year with CMC.
I couldn't agree more with you. I'm going to go CMC as my offensive player of the year. I think that Shanahan, like you said, will continue to get him the ball in special ways, in unique ways. And I think that it's going to help them having a full offseason together this year. I think we're going to see some cool packages. CMC, maybe him and Debo both in the backfield at some time. You can throw Juszczyk in there. You can put CMC out wide. I think it's going to be a really fun offense to watch. And I think CMC is going to run away with it.
I'm going to stick with the running back trend. I'm going to go Saquon here. I kind of mentioned it earlier. Not super high on the Giants, but Brian Dable and the rest of that offensive staff is just so good. Wink Martindale's going to bring the defense along. Going to need to just grind the ball out. Saquon's kind of been in that arguably RB1 a couple of times throughout his career. I wouldn't be surprised if he just stamps himself as the best running back in the league. I feel like he's a guy that we talk about doing one of two things. I wouldn't be surprised if he's either a 2,000-yard rusher or if he was a 1,000-yard rusher, 1,000-yard receiver. I think he's capable of doing both. I don't know if he ever will, definitely never in the same season, but I feel like he has that kind of potential to do both. And it's contract year. If I'm New York and Joe Shane, I'm just grinding him into the ground. Give him the ball as many times as possible. He's your best player. He's your chance to succeed. There we go.
So with the contract being up, I know that we talked about it a little bit in episode 1, and again we mentioned it's going to be a recurring theme. If you think he has a chance to go 1,000, and you think he is a good shot to go offensive player of the year this year, would you pay him at the end of this year, even though you're really against paying running backs if you think he's that special?
It's a jacked up system. So when Saquon signed his little extension where he got some fluff on the end to kind of convince him to sign the franchise tag tender, he didn't put in a clause where they can't tag him again next year, which is what he should have done. He was on his first tag. That's what has kind of been done in the past. Him and Josh Jacobs both didn't do it.
If they tag him again, I don't think he steps on the field next year, though.
But what kind of decision is that
right.
for him?
I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying I can't see him stepping on the field if they tag him again.
If I'm New York, I'm tagging him again, and then I'll listen to trade offers.
I
but
don't know.
I'm tagging him again. There's no reason to. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do or the morally correct thing to do, but business-wise, why would I do that? I'm gonna franchise tag him.
Hypothetical sake of the argument, he has that tender in it where you can't franchise tag him again, just for the sake of the running back argument. If he goes close to 1,000 offensive player of the year, you're totally against signing running backs, but you have someone like that.
I mean,
are you resetting the market with him?
It all comes down to guarantees. I mean, let's say he does do that. I would say his market's probably around $15 million per year at that point, wouldn't you guys say? And then I would say first 2 years guaranteed is really the highest he would get. So if I'm giving him $30 million guaranteed on a 3 or 4 year deal, I feel like that's the most fair thing. I don't love it, but also Saquon's one of those freaks that just maybe he can be the exception. But even that would make me really nervous. I think a better deal for the team and a more realistic would be maybe push it up to 16, maybe even 17 per year, go crazy with it. But then also guarantees are only going to be 28. So it's a give and take because honestly, it comes down to guarantees. But if he really wants to bump the average per year up, which is what it's going to take.
New topic. We're off topic. Next episode. My pick is Joe Burrow. I've always been high on him since college. He was my favorite quarterback. He came into the league with the weapons, but I think he would just be just as good without the weapons. He's definitely the second best quarterback in the league to me. I think every time he plays Mahomes, he's with Mahomes, playing against him. I'm not saying he's just as good as Mahomes, doesn't have the same stuff as Mahomes, but I think he's really good. And I just see him coming back and killing it this year. I think if he lowers the interceptions, he will get it for sure because he has 40 touchdowns every year. He had 10 interceptions.
Defensive player of the year, I'm just going to get right to it. I have Micah Parsons. This is actually the first year in probably 5 years that I haven't picked Myles Garrett, which it's not that I ever want Myles Garrett to win defensive player of the year as a Steelers fan. I just always expect it. He's a physical freak. This year I'm going to go Micah Parsons. I mean, he has the highest potential of any maybe football player in the league. He can play everything. I say him as defensive player of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I would not be sad with 2 Penn State players winning some awards. However, not a Steelers fan, only non-Steelers fan on this podcast, but I am going to go TJ Watt. As much as I dislike the Steelers, he is just so fun to watch. I mean, if you turn on a game, he just looks almost every single game. He just looks like the most dominant player on the field.
He does crazy shit every single week. It's
ridiculous. The way he
covers.
He's a great rusher. He covers. He's good against the run. He gets strip sacks. He gets turnovers. He'll have a pick six here. I mean, it is ridiculous. He needs to stay healthy. Obviously, Steelers fans would love him to stay healthy. And honestly, as a non-Steelers fan, I want him to stay healthy too, just because he is so fun to watch and he is so dominant. I think he wins Defensive Player of the Year.
I'm with Hayden. I got Micah Parsons because he's a freak athlete. I mean, I was between him and TJ. Like, I didn't pick TJ because he's injured, but as a Steelers fan, I hope he gets it because he's so dominant. But Parsons could do it all too. He was actual linebacker before he's an edge rusher now, but he's a freak. He could do everything, and he's not even that big too. And you just saw him against Lane Johnson. Like, he demolished Lane Johnson until he got hurt too. And then when he got hurt, he just changed the whole game for Dallas and almost won the game for them because of that.
Yeah, and my pick for Defensive Player of the Year came down to the two guys that we've talked about. I'll be a bit of a homer, and I'm going to go with TJ Watt this year. I just think that TJ Watt has probably the best pass rush moves in the NFL. You look at him, he's not as big or imposing or athletic as some of these other guys, but he wins time and time again. Every time he lines up, he is winning against somebody. He is just he's such a game wrecker for the Steelers and also for the teams that he's playing against. You see the impact that not having him had on the Steelers last year, and I think that having the guys on the other side of him with Alex Highsmith, who is developing and had 15 sacks last year, and then a young guy, Nick Herbig, who, I mean, I think everybody at this point, I think everybody in the league right now is on watch based on how much, the film from preseason. Say what you want about the preseason, but he was an absolute rock star in the preseason. So I think that having those guys and being able to filter that out is only going to keep TJ fresher, and he's going to see less double teams because other guys, and they have Cam Hayward in the middle. They have him on the outside. They have another good rookie, Keanu Benton, on there. So I think them adding pieces around is going to free up TJ to just have a monster year. Is he going to tie the sack record again? Is he going to break it? We'll have to wait and see. I think if he wins Defensive Player of the Year, it's because he broke the sack record. I'm not saying he's going to have 27, but I think he could have 23 and a half.
And next we have Comeback Player of the Year. Do we really? I don't know if we really need to waste any time.
It's going to be DeMar, but I think it's going to be Tua. If the DeMar thing didn't happen.
Tua's not it reminds me a lot of the Alex Smith year, where he stepped foot on a football field even before he became a starter again. Alex Smith suiting up, he won Comeback Player of the Year. DeMar Hamlin, Comeback Player of the Year.
What does DeMar have to do to lose this award? I was trying to bait you. Don't say it.
Yeah, there's nothing he can do. Tua is interesting but then even Tua, let's say Tua balls out, which I feel like could happen. I feel like then we're looking more of Tua as an Offensive Player of the Year, maybe even an MVP candidate.
How about this? Reply in the comments what DeMar Hamlin has to do to not win the Defensive Comeback Player of the Year award.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Alex Smith year. I think a similar year is what J.J. Watt did after Hurricane Harvey. It's everybody knew he was winning Walter Payton Mandate. It wasn't even a question as to who was winning it. It was J.J. Watt.
Is this an NFL award, honestly? Now that you guys are bringing up all these examples, it's what are we doing here?
Well, that was Walter Payton Man of the Year award. Okay, so that's a little different. Right. And so Comeback Player of the Year, I remember there's Shereen Williams, a beat reporter for Dallas, was joking around the year Ryan Tannehill won it because she was like, what is he coming back from, sucking? And then I think Gina won it last year, kind of same thing. I honestly,
those are better than.
I have a problem with it being them coming back from sucking because there's some adversity.
I think that's what it should be.
You come back from an injury or sucking.
Most improved.
Yeah. So I don't mind that.
I think it's either coming back from an injury or you did suck or you did a nobody and you made a name for yourself.
But it should be they're actually improving, not just a cool story.
There's no drama with it this year because we know, but I actually don't hate the DeMar Hamlin. I don't have a problem with him getting an award. Eli's just
he's a decent backup when he played. He was a decent backup.
All right, let's get to an award that there's actually some debate about. Coach of the Year. I'm gonna start things off. I have Sean McVay. I'm high on the Rams. I think there's a sour taste in his mouth from last year. Interesting note, not really with Sean McVay, but coaches of the year have a weird history of being fired a couple years after they win it. Matt Nagy's a coach of the year winner. Jason Garrett is. It's not really the best coach because Bill Belichick, I don't think he's won it in my time of being a football fan. Tomlin has it. I think Harbaugh might have one. Reed doesn't have very many. It's typically more of surprises which is an interesting way to do it. Bill Belichick not having a Coach of the Year award, at least recently, is a little far-fetched, but I'll save that for another day. Christian, who's your...
So I got Robert Saleh because I just think it's a safe pick because of Aaron Rodgers going. He's the vet. He's experienced. Their defense is nuts this year. They just keep adding pieces. The only really question is their O-line, but I think that they were almost a playoff team last year. They're definitely going to be one with Aaron Rodgers and the team that they have now. I was between Dan Campbell and Matt LaFleur, but I chose Saleh because he was a safe pick.
I think Saleh's a really good pick. So basically, again, like Hayden said, Coach of the Year is usually it's not necessarily the Comeback Player of the Year award, but it's kind of in that same vein for me. It's not always just the best coach. So I think this is where my pick kind of gets tricked up. I have Kyle Shanahan. He's going to be low on the odds, and you might be surprised about that. But that's because he's returning a great team. He has a great team, and a lot of people argue, well, what coaching needs to be done for them to improve? However, I think they have just such a remarkable year that it's undeniable that he is Coach of the Year. I think some of the young guys that are up there in the odds, like Dan Campbell, I think they struggle a bit. The one person, if I'm not going Shanahan, again, he's going to have a remarkable year to win, and I just see that happening. I do like Sean Payton just because I think there's a good chance that Russell has a bounce back year. And because of that, I think that if Russell has a bounce back year, I think Sean gets a lot of that credit, whether it's warranted or not, is one thing I think a lot of people would say it would be. I think Russell's just a better player than he showed last year. So I could see Sean Payton kind of sneaking it away. Again, I just think the 49ers have a remarkable year, and you just can't deny Shanahan winning it.
For all you trivia buffs out there, Bill Belichick has won Coach of the Year 3 times. He won it in 2003, 2010, and where's the third? 2007.
I think that's
a lot more recent than I thought, but even that's
a
almost
lot.
15 years. So
you brought Mike Tomlin. I thought Mike Tomlin should have wanted the second to last year for Big Ben. I think that's what it was, right?
Yeah,
what
the
was the
year
year that he
out
got
with-
hurt? Yeah.
when Rudolph and Duck Hodges
I think he
came
should have
in.
wanted that year because
I mean, Kyle Shanahan's going to have like a Bill Belichick type of year. When Bill Belichick won it, he went 14-2, 16-0, and 14-2. For Shanahan to win it with a great team already, he's going to have to do something like that, and I think
I
he
can
does.
see Mike Tomlin winning this year if we go nuts this year.
Mike
make it to
Tomlin
the
does not have a
playoffs.
Coach of the Year award.
Yeah.
Wow.
3 out of the 4 of us picked people from the Shanahan tree, whether it was Shanahan himself, Saleh, and then McVay. Just another interesting how deep that tree really goes.
So for me, I'm going to talk about actually one of the teams that I talked about earlier in the show with the Lions. I think that Dan Campbell, I talked about this earlier, is like he's a culture changer. He came in there and he turned this team around from what it was and for how historically bad it's been to a really solid year last year. Again, the records didn't necessarily show it, but I think that they had a really solid year last year.
Weren't they?
They were thrown with great teams. I mean, if you would have said that the highest scoring game of last year before the season started would have been the Seahawks versus the Lions, who would have believed you, right? Like I think that Dan Campbell is great for the community. I think that he's great for the city of Detroit. I think that he gets his team fired up. And even if the Lions aren't like a Super Bowl contender this year, I think that they make the playoffs, and that's enough to give Dan Campbell the Coach of the Year.
Luke,
We
who's your
really
pick?
turned into a Lions podcast today. A lot of Lions.
Yeah, who's your pick?
While Luke's thinking of that, we're going to do Super Bowl predictions. We might have to revisit this mid-season, but for now, who are our initial Week 1 Super Bowl picks? Josie?
I'll go first. Yeah. So Super Bowl. I think that one of these teams that I'm about to mention is going to repeat going to the Super Bowl. Obviously, I'm talking about the Eagles. I think that overall, as a team, they didn't get worse. I think that they probably got better in most areas. Again, I talked about it earlier, like another year in the system with everything. You have the best dual threat quarterback in the NFL. There's question marks around like the running back, but I don't foresee them really running the ball a whole lot this year. Like they have absolute dogs on the outside with Devontae Smith, who was, I think, the number 9 receiver last year in the numbers, and they had the number 6 receiver in AJ Brown. They had Dallas Goedert, who I don't know the number on him, but he's an absolute menace when I think he struggled with some injuries maybe in the past couple seasons, but when he's on the field, he's an absolute game wrecker. They have a great offensive line, aging, but still great. They have some Hall of Famers on there. I think with Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson, like I really think that when it comes down to it, the Eagles are going to repeat this year, and they're going to go up against a team that might have a slow start this year with their quarterback being potentially out for up to 4 weeks. I think the Bengals. I do think that the Bengals are going to not repeat. Obviously, they didn't make it last year, but the year before. The Bengals are just a great team. Like their offense is hard to stop for any defense in the entire NFL. And I think that with getting Joe Burrow back, like I said, they might have a bit of a slow start. So that even if they are the 5th or 6th seed in the AFC, it's like they're still going to win the wild card. They're still going to go on, and they're still going to be that team at the end of the year. And so I easily see them, going all the way up into the AFC Championship game, winning that game. I have Eagles over Bengals 37-30.
Go for it, Christian.
So my pick is the 49ers for the NFC, which I think is the best team in the NFC still. And then, so for the AFC, I think AFC is better than the NFC, but there's just the teams, I just feel like there's a lot of question marks, because it's just playoffs, like they could get torched with that. I chose the Jets because they have Aaron Rodgers, who's a vet quarterback. I think they're going to win their division. They have a nuts receiver, Garrett Wilson. They have a great backfield. O-line, it's the only question, but we'll see if they could turn it up in the season. Their defense is just nuts. They added to it every year. They have great backups. It's just crazy to me. And so I think they win. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I have the Jets winning 41-38.
Yeah, that'd be a fun game. So I talked up a lot about the Niners this episode. I'm going to go the Niners winning the Super Bowl. Again, I just think they're too balanced. I think Shanahan's an amazing coach. I think with the year with CMC, I think Purdy doesn't have to do too much. I think he does enough to win a Super Bowl. It does concern me, the recent Kittle and Bosa news. But even if they do start off slow, even if, let's say, they lose week 1 in Pittsburgh, I still think that they aren't going to be challenged enough in the regular season with their division and with their schedule. I believe, again, that they're just too balanced. I don't see them pressing going into the playoffs. I think they get a top seed and probably a bye and see them coasting to the Super Bowl and winning it. I see them beating the Buffalo Bills. Again, I had Josh Allen as my MVP pick. I think he has an amazing year. I think Buffalo finally breaks through in the AFC. I don't think they quite win the Super Bowl, however. I have the Niners with a final score of 31-27. Hopefully a close game.
Yeah, coming into this, I had the Niners over the Jets, just thinking Aaron Rodgers would get them close but not be able to finish it off. After hearing all your guys' predictions, I'm actually going to pick the Chiefs, take one for the team, just because I feel like kind of the same thing with Mahomes. Like, none of us picking the Chiefs just seems ridiculous, and like we're asking to be made a meme by February. So I'm going to take the Chiefs over the Niners, a rematch of the Super Bowl from a few years ago. Chiefs win. We'll go 24-17.
I did also have one final thought with mine for my Super Bowl prediction. Something that happened last year but hasn't happened since 2001. The MVP wins the Super Bowl. My prediction.
Mahomes did that last year.
That's what I'm saying. Last year it happened, but before that it was like 2001,
yeah.
I think. So yeah,
it was Kurt Warner in '99.
Mm-hmm.
So
99. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But Luke, do you have that Coach of the Year pick?
Yeah, and it'll also tie into my Super Bowl prediction. I'll come in a frame here. So I think it'll be Sean McDermott. I forget who was touching on the Bills earlier. Yeah, I know. It might be a hot take. I haven't done as much research as you guys, to be fair, so haven't had as much
Sorry, you didn't say Christian Gonzalez was on the Lions.
And then I think this is the year the Bills put it together and go to the Super Bowl. Take it for the win against I'm going to say the Eagles make it in the NFC again.
Go back to episode 1 and see what I said about the Bills, because I disagree with that.
Hey, that's today's hot take, I guess.
Yeah. So thanks for tuning in. This has been the second episode of Second and Short. Stay tuned this week. We have a couple of fun stuff that's going to be posted on the Instagram. Make sure you guys check that out. And enjoy football. Week 1 is here finally. Second and Short podcast out.